Alrighty, and we are live, ladies and gentlemen. I am more than excited, more than blessed to be able to introduce to you amazing Christian man that I've looked up to for many years. I've been following his work for a while. I'm sure many of you have as well. And so to even be in this live stream right here is an absolute blessing. So I'm absolutely excited to introduce Jay Warner Wallace to all of you. And yeah, Jay, do you want to say anything? Any
Well,
words to
yeah, I just want to say that I feel the same way. I mean, this is, I talked to you about this before we started, that I feel like I'm excited to talk to you because you're in a unique position given how young you are. And I feel like as I'm getting older, I feel like this has become like that's become a commodity I wish I could
yeah.
purchase, right? But I think this is important for us at making the case because most people don't, this is sad, but my dad said to me, who he's in his 80s, and he said, this, the changes that we see happening just in terms of how the culture even perceives Christians. These are changes that are seismic and they seem to be happening all around us. And he says, I don't think it's going to affect me, talking about himself, because he figures he's got, 15 minutes left, which I don't think is true, but he thinks that. So he says, but I don't think it necessarily will affect you, talking about me. But he says, I am worried it's going to affect Jimmy and David and my kids because they are, in their 30s, upper 20s, but here you are at 22. You're going to see changes in your life in terms of how the culture sees the church
Yeah.
and sees the goodness of Christian, if they even think it is good anymore. And so I think this is part of why I'm just encouraged. When I first met you, we were at a local event and I first met you and I thought, you had a passion to do this and you asked me right away, would you be willing to do something like this? And I'm thinking, wow, this is great because look how young you are. You're actually in Gen Z. Now, this is the group that a lot of us who are doing Christian apologetics, we're asking the question what's different? We are all concerned about the same kinds of issues, the same issues that face everyone related to sin and salvation and does God exist and all that stuff. But I think it looks different and we talk about it differently if you're a boomer like me or if you're somebody who's in Gen Z. And that's why I was looking forward to this interview, because I thought, well, I'm going to probably pick your mind more than you're picking mine.
Well,
So,
let me get the jump on that real quick because for any of the audience members who may not be entirely familiar with who you are, or maybe they've heard your name in passing, what if you could kind of give us a quick synopsis of what specialized work you do? Would you tell them regarding what has made you so attractable to so many people who want to hear about Christ and want to hear about the things that you have to say from this unique angle that you take it at?
yeah, so I wasn't raised in the church. I wasn't raised as a Christian, but about 35 years old, I was working as a detective in Los Angeles County, and my wife wanted to go to church. So I walked into a local church and heard this message from a pastor who said that Jesus, well, he said all kinds of stuff, but the thing that piqued my interest was he said that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. Now, to investigate that claim, and I was only selfishly interested. I'm not interested in God at that point. I thought that was a joke, but I was happy to go with my wife because I wanted to, honor my wife. But I didn't. I thought I'd just be going as an atheist. My dad would go to church as an atheist, most of his life. So I don't have a problem going as an atheist too. But I did have a skill set in which we could look at. Look, I work. Most of my work was done in Los Angeles County, investigating cold cases. Those are just murders, and because there's no statute of limitations on a murder, so we don't have cold burglaries or cold robberies. Those close by statute, but murders stay open. And I often will get a case where it's so old that I don't have access to the eyewitnesses anymore because they no longer live, they're no longer living. They passed away, and sometimes I don't even have access to the investigators from 1970 because they've either died or they're suffering from maybe some declining health issues. And I just so now I got these reports in which a detective who's no longer available to me is interviewing another set of witnesses that are no longer available to me, and I've got to figure out if I got a case. And this is really like Luke investigating the case for Jesus and talking to eyewitnesses and servants of the word. But I don't have any access to Luke. I can't ask him, why'd you write it that way? Did you ask this question? I can't ask those things of Luke because Luke's not available to me, just like the detective's not available to me. And I can't even ask those questions of the eyewitnesses because they're not available to me. So I just said, I'm going to apply my experience working cold cases, and I know how to test eyewitnesses, even in these supplemental reports, to see if they're reliable. Let's just to take that template and apply it to the Gospels. And that's what really opened and unlocked the Gospels to me.
Hmm.
I was looking to see really for the wisdom statements of Jesus. I was not interested in whether he was God. And I really expected that the New Testament would be filled with proverbial wisdom statements, like maybe the wisdom statements of Baha'u'llah or of Buddha or Confucius or something. In other words, that I didn't realize I was going to open the Gospels and see that there was a linear, chronological. These folks want me to believe that this stuff happened in a particular time in history, in a particular sequence, in a particular place in the world. Well, that's something I could investigate. So that's really what got me in. And then I started writing. I eventually became a Christian, and many years later now I was working with young people, high schoolers, and I eventually wrote a book, and this is what started a career, kind of speaking, which really is, that's the funny thing about it is it was never a career to me.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, much of the stuff I do is not. I don't. We don't do it for much. I have a pension. I'm still. What pays the bills is my pension. Okay, but I feel like as Christians, that part of the expression of who we are is going. It's your life changes a little bit, right? I mean, it should. You find yourself reading scripture, which we read scripture every day. We're in the Gospel of Luke right now again, and we're just it's funny how you can read the Gospel of Luke and find something new almost every time, right?
Seriously.
So anyway, so I'm reading scripture. You have a prayer life, you have it, but you have a life of service. Like you want to be able to serve in some way, and this ends up being, I think, creating content, talking about Jesus, even doing this video with you, doing this interview with you is the expression. It's from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so it's an expression of our faith and I've never really, when I first started, when I first became a Christian, there wasn't an internet social media world out of which you could build a platform.
Hmm.
And so for 15 years, I had a small website when this thing first started coming around online, and the internet world kind of started I think around 1998 or so.
I wasn't even alive yet.
Well, I launched a website maybe in 2000, right in that range. It was just like a
Hmm.
blogger.com or something. I forget what I used as the platform, and it was pretty lame. And it was called pleaseconvinceme.com. But at least it gave me a place where if I was reading about it, like today, I'm reading in scripture in Luke 13, and I'm seeing a couple of things that I'm like, they provoke me. If I wasn't so busy, I would be writing about what I just learned this morning. And where am I going to put that? Some people journal, but so much of our private life now is expressed publicly. Like you might have taken pictures of your vacation, and you probably be the only people who'd ever see them. Now, of course, the first thing you do is you post them publicly.
Yeah.
So I just love the fact that what we're doing now is we are thinking out loud about God, and then we are making that publicly available. And so I guess in that sense, you and I, we are content creators, and this just grows on its own. And so now I get asked to speak around the country, and that's where you and I got the chance to meet at a speaking event. But the reality of it is, this is just the outcome of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so I see this as, I used to always say, we don't need another $1 million apologist, and I don't
Hmm.
consider myself that way. We need $1,000,001 apologists. And that's what I am, and that's what you are, and that's what we are doing here, is we are making a public defense for what we think is true about Christianity.
That was amazing, and I wholeheartedly agree. And you said in the beginning even about the remarks with the differences in the generations, but I think even in the midst of so many of the changes that are happening, and believe me, I mean they are on full display.
Yeah.
Um, if we think it's Solomon, in Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. And I think a lot of things still are the same despite the so many differences. Like
Yeah.
speaking for myself, a lot of what you said resonated with me regarding wanting to investigate the claims of Christianity and even just the existence of God in general. For myself, it was a lot earlier when I was around like 12 or 13, but it was in junior high school when we started studying things like astronomy and the observable world around me that it really kind of caused me to pull myself out of my own world and my own bubble and really say, okay, well, wait, I mean, what is the purpose of any of this? Why am I even here? I mean, let alone Christianity and doing my own. And it's crazy because even at the time, being so young, in my mind, I didn't have any incentive to be an agnostic or an atheist or any of that. I just wanted to know. It was just genuine, almost childlike curiosity. But I
Do
think,
you think that was common to the people your age at the time, or do you think you were unusual in that way?
you know, I think all of us have a level at which it's common, meaning that all of us at some point lay our heads on our pillow and wonder those type of things. But I think what often happens is it gets snuffed out as quickly as it arises. As soon as people start to think these questions about life and wonder what the purpose of it all even is, they get whisked away by distractions, and I mean, even more so
Mm,
in today's day and age. And I
yeah,
think that's definitely been one of the biggest pitfalls, which is why I'm so glad to see people like you doing what you're doing their best to work into the distractions, through
yeah,
social media and things like that to
yeah.
reach them. Because yeah, like a lot of them, when I mean, just speaking personally, like friends and family and things like that, when I've talked with them, they've all said, yeah, I've thought about these things, but rarely did it ever go beyond thoughts. Because I'm
Mm,
not saying it was always just distractions. Sometimes it was they genuinely didn't want to come to that conclusion. But yeah, unfortunately, I feel like I definitely was in the minority in that sense because not that I'm so great because I decided to push forward, but just because I consider myself blessed enough to not have been so consumed by all those things that would have wished any person away. I'm not
well,
special in that sense.
were your parents church? Did they
You
were they
know,
believers?
at that time, it really wasn't at the level that it is now, and I myself have, especially with my mom, have really even encouraged her in her faith. Now through all these years later. So
Mm,
yeah, there wasn't really much of that going on either, but it was just a genuine like, wow, like I exist, I'm alive, and this is all happening, but why? And so that's why reading some of your material, like in your latest book, by the way, I gotta plug it, person of interest. If
I'm
you have
so
not
glad you
checked
got
out
it.
this book,
Yeah.
you've got to check it out. Absolutely amazing content. And this is a what do they say? It's like a necessity. It's a classic for anyone questioning and having those type of thoughts that I did even all those years back. And so
So,
yeah.
we hear a lot. I've talked a lot about this. I even wrote a book called "So the Next Generation Will Know"
Mhm,
with Sean McDowell, where we've assessed. When I became a Christian, I was 35, and at the time, that was it is still relatively rare that people
yeah.
become. The older you get, the more rare it is that you'll become a Christian. And it used to be that tipping point where the most Christians were Christians by the time they were 18. And there's good reason to believe that has shrunk down to 12 or 13. Now, interestingly, you said it was at 12 or 13 where you're starting to really think. And I'm wondering,
Mhm.
what, why didn't it happen for you at earlier or in high school? By the time you're in high school, you kind of already had a thought about these issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that honestly, personally speaking, I go back and forth on whether I think I was saved around 12 or 13. I do know I was asking myself those questions, but
Mm,
it was in 2015 when things decisively changed for me. And I think that's important as well because if you would have stopped me on the street, when I was 12, 13, 14, and you would have asked me, hey, do you believe God exists? I would have, I could have given you reason after reason. And that was never the issue, right? But ultimately, Christianity is about surrender and not just intellectual assent, but taking that
right.
knowledge and letting it change us. You even
Yeah.
said that as well during the talk that I heard you at the end,
Yeah.
about, if you've heard this info and you've still been kind of having this kind of, coasting by Christianity, it's time to stop that. And I think that was when things decisively changed for me. But
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I do think about that, about why it didn't happen later, or, how things might have been different based on whether I was in high school or even college. I mean, man, if I thought it was hard in high school, 15, being right in the middle of it, and you've got, obviously one set of influences trying to pull you one way and then
Yeah.
one set of influences another. But then, man, even more so in college, it was, I mean, really, really constricted. And so, yeah, it's hard to think about that, but
Well,
I'm grateful.
and I'm guessing that because just how we met and we all kind of live in the same region, and I'm thinking that probably this was not a super churched part of the world that you were living in when you were in your early high school years, right? I'm thinking this is probably you probably aren't surrounded by cultural Christianity like we might be if I was in Louisiana or I
Hmm.
was in some places in the South. You do see more. You see a more population density. You see in more churches on more street corners in the community than you would see, for example, where I might live. But I'm guessing that you had other. What was so? You mentioned it being hard. So
Hmm.
what was it that was so hard for you, you would say, in that period in high school? What was the biggest challenge as a relatively young Christian, new Christian?
One of the biggest challenges was the fact that, I had looked at the evidence, and for
Mhm.
me, my biggest thing at that time was like astronomy. I loved astronomy,
Mm.
loved looking at the stars and other planets and all. And I just saw there was no way I could honestly look at that and walk away thinking that that was some cosmic accident or that it wasn't intelligently designed. Even before
Mm.
Christianity, I thought that pretty adamantly. But at the same time, being so young, and I felt like Columbus almost, right? I wasn't the first person to necessarily discover these things or think about these things, but it was the first for me. And
Yeah.
so, even though it's very real for you, at the same time, it hasn't really been tested out yet with others, and you're thinking, man, am I crazy for coming to this type of conclusion, or what is this? And so, man, at the time in high school, definitely a lot of close friends were atheists or agnostics, and honestly, like straight up hostile to the faith, not even just like,
Yeah.
oh, like whatever. And that was definitely something that was a bit jarring for me. But looking back, I'm grateful for it because it almost battle hardened me in a way and forced me to really understand what I believe and why. And so definitely
Mm.
just the factor of
Good.
intimidation and thinking, man, I don't know if I can talk about this and all that was a very real thing because I mean it was tough then and it's only gotten mountainously even tougher now. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
definitely what
So
I was.
what were the resources? What kinds of things
Mhm.
did you do in order to kind of to get battle ready, to get battle hardened?
The internet was my best friend. I mean, I can't give you an exact year that I first heard about guys like you, Frank Turek, Ravi Zacharias at the time, all of those different figures.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I remember very early on coming into contact with that sort of material. I wasn't really much of like a big YouTube guy yet, but I
Yeah.
was reading a whole lot, and uh, I remember being blessed enough to listen to speakers the likes of which were John Lennox. John
Mm.
Lennox was
Yeah.
an. I
Okay.
remember being 14, getting his book, His Science Buried God, and writing down notes in the beginning talking about causation and the beginning of the universe and things like that. Listening to people like him, as I said, you, Frank Turek, what was the other guy's name as well? The one who spoke a lot about abortion. He worked a lot with you and
Wait, Scott Klusendorf?
no, I think it was like
Mm.
Mark Robbins,
Now
Mike
you got
Mike
now you
Adams, Mike
oh, Mike
Adams.
Adams. Oh,
That's who it
yeah,
was. Yeah, I
absolutely,
listened to
yeah,
him a lot
yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
Oh, that's a sad story too, yeah, but
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was we lost a huge, warrior when we lost Mike, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the biggest
Mm,
factor was just the internet being available at my fingertips, but also I was blessed enough to have a church and have an environment where they promoted a lot of that stuff, and so it
yeah, it's
wasn't
good.
this type of cross country thing where I had to trek here, or, do this, just right down the street.
Yeah,
And that
that
was
that
pivotal.
can't be understated, what you just said. That's a good point because I know the church you're talking about, and this is something that is, I think, so vital, that your experience as a Christian is connected to the community in which you are attending. I mean, for a lot, sadly, for a lot of Christians, that might be 90% of the number of hours they're spending even thinking about God because they're
Mhm.
doing it in the context of our church attendance. And they're thinking, that's really all I need to do, right? Well, the great thing about some churches, like the one you're in, is not only will they give you great content, but they're the kinds of churches that drive you deeper into your own investigation so that you see yourself as an investigating believer, right? A
Absolutely.
thoughtful believer.
Yeah.
So then you don't have to do it all on Sunday morning because I know I'm developing a culture in the church in which people want to spend their off time doing more of this, right? I
Absolutely.
you see that church, for example, is so pivotal in the way that the intensity of believers that I meet there, it's clearly a top down. We like it or not, we have a tendency to take the shape and the attitude of our leaders in the Christian setting. We just do. And so, if you've got somebody who's got a certain approach, you find that most congregants, most people who attend that church, end up adopting that approach. So,
Mhm.
I think that's why this is really a struggle that we have to help pastors. That's not an easy job, and you got a multi generational group there, in which you've got lots of folks in all different age groups, and they all seem energized.
Yeah,
Something's going right. So that's something I think we have to kind of work on going forward too. So, okay,
yeah,
so look, I know that you asked me originally to come on and talk about person of interest, but I do want to kind of do it in the context of you and me as friends.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
if you look at I wrote that book because I really thought I needed I no longer I wonder if maybe I'm wrong. You tell me if I'm wrong. That the discussion isn't anymore about the godness of God. It's about the goodness of God. In other words, I see that we're heading in this direction, right? Like right now we are in a culture clash because of this decision that's about to be made by the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
really Roe v. Wade. So we're going to end up in this clash, and what I'm seeing more and more that people recognize that if I could get rid of the Christian worldview, for the most part, that's the substrate on which a lot of people stand who hold conservative values.
Hmm.
They hold biblical values, and not that everyone has falls in the same place on even on this issue, right, of the sanctity of life. But
Hmm.
for the most part, Christians are going, unless you're really trying to parse this out in different ways. For the most part, we're going to probably be in more agreement than
Hmm.
other groups because we are standing on the same theological foundations. But I get a sense that at some point people are looking at us and saying, that Iron Age book that you guys believe in, that is the source of all misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, racism, all these issues that's depriving us of our rights. It's all oppressive. It's used oppressively. In other words, it's not as it divine. It's
Hmm.
not as it even evidentially supported. I think the question is it good? I always say that if somebody said, "Look, I want to make a case for you. Give me 15 minutes. I want to make a case for Nazism." I think most people would say, "I don't really need you to make a case for that because I already know that there's nothing good in there that I want to learn about."
Hmm.
And if I already know that up front, I don't need it. I don't want to hear your case.
And that's what they're trying to do with the Bible, so that it's not even something that has to be,
That's what I'm now.
regarded or.
Okay, so is this the old man? There's this progressive ad of commercials for Progressive Insurance, right? It's the one where the guy is a counselor and he's trying to keep these people from becoming their parents, right?
Oh yeah.
Like that. Everyone's like acting like an old person, and they're all like younger. And I don't want to be the old guy,
Hmm.
and so I wonder, is this just me at 61 saying, okay, but do you feel, as someone in that Gen Z, do you feel like this is what's where we're headed? Are you starting to hear this at your age too? That the problem is the Bible, the problem is Christianity in general.
you know Today's what, Friday? Just on Tuesday I was talking with a friend, and he was a believer, and he was telling me about some suffering that someone close to him was going through. And I told him, I said, you know what, man, and I've said this multiple times to people, that in my 9-10 years of studying the idea of God, and then some years below that being a Christian and so on, I've studied so many different things in so many different fields, from the sciences to different worldviews, philosophy, all these different things. And I've asked myself questions that many people will never even think about in their lives. It's just the way it is. And yet,
Mhm.
despite that, I would still, with my chest out, say that the number one question when it comes to the idea of Christianity and God is, if God, why suffering? Not because
Mhm.
the answer isn't there. It's been beaten with a
Yeah,
beaten till it's like a dead horse,
yeah,
but because it's such an emotional one. And as you said, this is such an emotional time, an emotionally charged time in which people are so divided and so ready to tear each other apart, that it'll only make sense that the most emotional question of all um, would be one that's like that, because it's one that, even if you know the intellectual answer to, cuts so
yeah,
deeply. Because
right.
I know believers who would walk circles around most people intellectually, and yet you put them in a hard situation and they don't turn their backs or anything, but man, like you'll really
Yeah,
see them kind of stagger in ways that they wouldn't have if things were all nice and well. And so yeah, when you think about the idea of if God, why suffering, and all of these different things in the Bible, like misogyny and
yeah,
slavery, and all of
yeah,
these different examples of inequality and oppression. Absolutely. I mean, when you already have a society that's got its antennas out looking for things like that to go
yeah,
after. The whole premise of your book, Person of Interest, is about how, you make it a point to not reference the New Testament in this book. You use all
right.
these outside evidences, which is amazing. I mean, that's makes it extremely accessible. But it just proves my point, which is that, look, even if you're an unbeliever, because of the sheer influence that Christ has had and Christianity has had, even if you end up saying, I'm never going to believe this, or I'll always be an agnostic or whatever it might be, you can't afford to ignore this stuff, right? You can't afford to at least not know what the Bible says and
Yeah.
what its main message is. And so I think even people who are going after it understand that, right? Even if they say they're never going to become Christians or they're never going to adhere to this sort of teaching, they recognize the influence that it's had, whether by personal experience because they were raised in a Christian
Right.
home, or because it's just all around them. And when they recognize that, they're going to see that. I mean, it's kind of a crude joke, but like in prison, they say you got to go for the biggest guy you see first, right?
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
we're in this holding cell right now, and the Bible has been
Yeah.
it's been holding a 2,000 or more than 2,000 year record in its influence and the way it's just completely transformed a society. And so it's only sensible and only logical that it would be the number one target. Absolutely.
Yeah, when I think about this too, it's like as I see it right now, the reports for today that there, people are surrounding that are going to be walking by the homes of these Supreme Court justices. Okay, that's not the issue for me. What I see is that when we make a mistake, when we do something that we would say is morally reprehensible, when a Christian does this, and it happens all the time, we're humans too. We do all kinds of stupid things, but when we do it, we have a structure in place by we can say, "Hey, whoa, 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 what are you doing?
Hmm.
Okay, that is not appropriate behavior." I was listening to a commenter today or yesterday talk about how he thinks as conservatives we need to be tougher. Like we need to they're breaking the rules. We need to break the rules.
Hmm.
We cannot continue to be the nice guys who lose. Well, I think part of that is that as Christians, we know there are certain limits to the behaviors that we can engage in because we have a master who would rather have us not do that and trust him for the consequence than cheat the game in some way in
Yeah.
order to win. Listen, I struggle with this struggle of knowing how far, what's the parameter by which. But when I see that someone on our side of the theological spectrum does something we ought not do, well, then I feel like we can say, hey, let me call you back to this thing that transcends both of us, the teaching of
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. How do you reconcile the teaching of Jesus? I just wonder if we're in a world in which we don't agree on any objective moral standard we can call if everything is just whatever is expedient, whatever is practical, whatever works in the moment. I just fear for where we are going to be, and I wonder, do you feel this way at 22? Or do you feel any stress or anxiety just from the news cycle? In other words, I've noticed that people who are in that news cycle bullseye, they're constantly, maybe they're doing a YouTube channel where they're constantly talking about current events, or they get a podcast where whatever happens today, they're going to be talking about tomorrow. They
Mm-hmm.
don't strike me as happy people. They strike me as stressed out. They're on top of the news cycle and they can get huge clicks and huge audiences. But I wonder, I don't want to live that way.
Yeah.
I have to have some kind of balance, and I see that there's stress levels in the anxiety levels, or at least are reported to be pretty high amongst young people compared to. First of all, are you seeing that? Do you think that your generation is more anxious than older generations, and if so, why do you think it's that way?
First of all, absolutely. I mean, I think just from a kind of on the outside looking in observational perspective, I could adamantly say so. But even from personal experience, that was my observation before I even started the YouTube channel. I started it in the beginning of 2020, and I was still in college at the time. And I'd say about a year or two, even before that was on my mind. One of the first things I noticed while in school was I mean, I was in an environment that was very hostile to Christianity,
Mhm.
to these type of values that that
Mhm.
Bible believing Christians hold, and it was never. I mean, it wasn't always like explicitly thrown in your face, but I mean, you could feel it
Mhm.
in the air, and that was the number one thing I took away from just even being in like small classrooms, which was that it was like every time I walked in, they were ready to just give us something to mobilize about again and to be upset about. And
Mhm.
I remember thinking to myself, like, man, like I don't think I could live like this, where every day I'm just constantly looking for. Because first of all, I
Mhm.
recognize that I can't change the world like that, right? Like it's like
Right.
blowing a bunch of bubbles and trying to catch each one. You're gonna miss some, but you keep believing in your mind that you can absolutely 100% do it. And so as more keep getting blown and you keep missing more, you start to kind of question your sanity, like what's wrong with
Yeah.
me? I keep fighting and protesting and doing all this and that, and things just keep getting worse, or I'm not hitting this. And it was overwhelming, and this was from someone who didn't even necessarily agree with them on so many of their values, you know? So I imagine
Mm.
someone who had given themselves over to that and was full-fledged and was, yeah, okay, let's, let's protest this, let's go after that. I mean, man, you want to talk about a rat race and just the way it would burn you out. Absolutely. I mean, that was absolutely going on. And then to answer your second question regarding why, I know this is such a cliche answer, but in a lot of ways, I really do think that it's social media. And
Mhm.
when I say that, I can be more specific. So when I say social media, I more so mean the ability to get information that could completely alter the way you live at the drop of a hat, right? So for example, I think about something like TikTok or like YouTube Shorts, where people can disseminate so much information to you in the span of seconds, and before you know, an hour has gone by, and you've
Yeah.
gone through how many of those things. And I've had, like, on YouTube Shorts, for example, that's not a feature. If it were a feature you could remove, I'd remove it, right? But
Yeah.
I've had them show up in my feed, posts about Islam, posts about atheism and agnosticism. That, although fortunately we have channels like Red Pen Logic who are debunking these sorts of things, I just think about all the people that see that and never hear about Red Pen Logic, right? And then walk away thinking, okay, well, yeah, I guess that must be true. For example, one of my close friends and I, we have these sorts of discussions all the time, when it comes to things like intelligent design. And we say how we always hear people say stuff like, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. But hold on, science is the ability to test and observe and work within the observable world, right? So time, space, matter, and energy. But God, by definition, is outside of time, space, matter, and energy. So when you're telling a Christian that you won't believe in God until science can prove God, you're setting him up for failure, because you may not know this, but science can't even do what you want it to do,
Right. Right.
right? And so, look, 15 seconds, I just debunked that. Someone could hear that on some TikTok somewhere or in some, Reddit comment, and then walk away thinking, well, yeah, I guess God must not be real. And I mean, who knows how they'll, live their life after that. And so this isn't me saying I want to
Mhm.
be like the moral police, who controls every aspect of a person's life. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is that when truth goes forth, it does the work for you, right? But the problem is that it's being snuffed out, or at least not put to the forefront, because there's just so much out there that is
Yeah.
overwhelming, especially the rate at which you can get it. Now, I will say that people are also partly to blame for this too, because people don't actually slow down and question things, right? Of course, you
Yeah.
can hear these sorts of things at the drop of a hat, but it's a whole other thing to just take it in immediately. And that's why, I mean, again, I guess you could tie it back to social media, because that's kind of destroyed our ability to think critically
Yeah.
and our attention
That's what I was
span.
gonna
So
ask you. I was gonna
it's a
ask you, do
full
you
circle.
yeah,
Yeah.
do you think that the social media, model, that the technology is actually, encouraging, a less thoughtful kind of 30,000 foot real quick, "Okay, I got that answered, on to the next thing," kind of world?
Mhm.
So do you remember at your age, do you remember a time, because my son does, because he's 33, where
Mm.
he didn't have the glowing rectangle? In other words, and it's not so much that it's I'm not concerned about what the features of the glowing rectangle the phone can do for me. I'm more concerned about how is it structurally changing the way we think and
Yeah.
consume information, right? Because I agree with you. I think number one, it's increased our hostility and our lack of patience with each other, because the nature of social media is relatively impersonal if you choose it to be so. And so I often think, hey, look, if all you did on the social media is by rule, I'm not going to never get this to happen, but if by rule it was you have to have your personal photograph with your spouse and your kids and your where you live, your address is on your person, I think we would change the way we behave toward each other, because
Mhm.
it's the anonymity that gives us
Yes.
the license to be a hammer looking for a nail across the country on social media.
Absolutely.
And I think this is something that was not available. Think about that. The interaction you typically had as a living, breathing human being 20 years ago was probably going to be people with whom you had physical proximity.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
how else you get on the phone, I suppose, but those are people you met in person first anyway. So your world was limited to the people who knew where to find you.
Mhm.
And now we're in a place where these are cyber relationships that and with the people you may not. I mean, what's the show on MTV where they're catfishing, right? Where they're
Oh,
they're
yeah.
pretending to be somebody. This was
Yeah.
really hard to do. I mean, there were pen pals back in those days, but it was much harder to do in real time than it is today. This is a phenomena that comes out of a way that we've recrafted the way that we even relate to each other. And
Yeah.
like, I'm not saying anything that people don't already know, but I do think it has an impact on how we share the gospel. And look, we're past the halfway mark, but I want to ask you another question I've been thinking
Hmm.
about lately, and I've been talking about with my son, and that is the question of identity. Like, I
Oh,
think we are in the identity generation in the sense that, um, what's the first thing you have on your social media? You have your bio.
mhm.
I mean, we're shaping our social media so that we appear to be a certain way. We have certain values we embrace, and then we want to look like the person who embraces those values on social media. So we find ourselves, if whatever the cause is this week, we're likely to change our image so that it matches that cause. If somebody says, "Well, you need to put your pronouns on your social media," we're all putting pronouns on social media. This is what we do. Why do people do that? I think we all struggle with who are, like you started off talking about this. Like, what's the purpose of life? Why am I here? I
Yeah.
exist, but why do I exist? Who am I? And men do this all the time. In my generation, at least, we would like to a party. You shake a guy's hand. And the first question you're going to ask is, what do you do for a living?
Hmm.
Because at that point, what we really were saying is, what is your identity? Who are you? And we would invest our identity in our careers, and so that ends up being who we are. I wonder now if it's changing to, like, what are we doing online? But here's why I asked this question. So someone like this, the modernist view, the kind of view of what is true about God that maybe was represented most robustly, like by Josh McDowell's classic work, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. That's an approach that says, well, what is the case? What's the claim? What's the evidence for the claim? And then if that evidence is strong for the claim, we make a decision in favor of the claim. And I
Hmm.
want to, and then we've moved into this kind of experiential world. Like, what is it? What is my experience in this? Then it's like, what do I want? And now I think we're in this identity world where it's like, do I want to wear the t-shirt?
Hmm.
Pretty simple. Do I want to be known as if Christians are voting like that, or if Christians do this thing over here, or Christians hold this position politically, it's almost always expressed politically. Can I be a Christian? I've heard young people say that to me.
Yeah.
If I got to vote that way, I can't be a Christian. Like, we're
Yeah.
so far downstream on the issue of what the cultural issue is. Like, the first issue is, I think, is the Bible true?
Exactly. Yeah.
But
But
I
it's
don't
like putting the
wonder.
cart before the horse. It's
Yeah.
so garbled up. It's a
So
mess.
do you find that are you, what do you think of this idea that now it's about whether or not I want to be associated with a worldview? I
Mhm.
want to claim it as part of my identity. If I, for example, if in every social media bio now, the first thing you would list is, I'm a Christian. If that's the way you adopt it as identity, is that even a bigger barrier now that people don't want to be? And of course, this is a pretty big. I mean, I think God would not want us not,
Mhm.
identifying as Christ
Yeah.
followers if in fact we are. So do you see this issue of identity the way I'm seeing it? Maybe I'm wrong about it.
No, your age is deceiving me because you're hitting home run after home run with all of these points. But I would definitely say that identity is without a doubt one of the number one most prevalent issues. I mean, I myself, there was a time when I had Instagram, but I gave it up because of one of those. That was one of the biggest reasons, to be honest with you, because whether it was the temptation myself to want to appear a certain way to people or what I saw in others, it almost seemed like every other week I would see someone's profile and it was like they were a different person. And then I found myself living in that way where it was like rather than just wanting to enjoy something for the sake of enjoying it, my first thought was, what can I do to show people that I am doing something? Right. So is it me going to
Yeah.
this movie or being at this event or eating at this restaurant rather than just me living my life and just enjoying the freedoms that God has given me? And man, you realize how much of a hold it has on you once you try to give it up, right? Because when I first stopped, the fear of missing out was astronomical because you think, man, everyone's out there. Like I'm not up to date with all this info. I get back on after a time, and then such and such got engaged, or someone had a kid, and you're just thinking, man, like my life is just passing me by. But once I finally overcame that hurdle, I mean, for many reasons, it was amazing. One, because I found myself actually having more going on when I wasn't on social media and worried about how to present that to others than when
Yeah.
I was. It was kind of ironic, right?
It's
But then
freeing. Yeah.
honestly, and that's the second thing, because I don't remember after how long it was, but I remember specifically at a certain point, for some reason, I went back on temporarily and I said, you know what? And this is when you know it's real, when it's genuine. It's not just you gritting your teeth, but it's really you saying, like, man, I'm looking at these posts, I'm seeing all these things, especially in this charged society. It's like, I don't really I don't really want to waste my life peering into the windows of other people's lives, especially when so much of it is just this information that we said earlier, which is, I mean, just flat out wrong or opposed
Mm.
to the Bible, or things which are just aren't good to consume. Obviously we have to be aware of these things for the sake of being able to address them, and those sorts of things. But when it just becomes a pastime, I mean, I found it just degrading my mind more so than anything. And so there was a point where I just genuinely said, like, I don't want this. And I gave it up, and I haven't looked back since then. And it's been amazing, because it's almost like you're taken out of the matrix. And now that you look back on it, you're like, I can't even believe it was ever like that to begin with. I can't believe I thought like that to begin with. And so then now when I come across people who are still in the throes of it, struggling to find their identity, glued to social media and how they appear to others, it's like, man, your heart for them is just a lot stronger, because now you have yourself experienced what it's like on the other side of it
Yeah.
all, when you don't have that weight. And man, you want as many people to experience that as possible, but that can't come from anything that's not transcendent, right? Because it's just going to be one cause until it dies out, or it's just going to be one movement until it's no longer popular. But I mean, we're still talking about Christ. I mean, I think about this sometimes, the fact that 2,000 years later, honestly, like,
Yeah.
kings and queens and the biggest figures in history would do anything to still have their name as that big of a
Exactly.
deal after that much time. And here we are, and it came from
That's
someone
right.
who by no means emphasized how he came off to others as much as he did just walking with and obeying God. Which is why, in Christ, and this is speaking about salvation, obviously, but I think it's true even in like the earthly sense, which is that if whoever desires to save his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will save it. Meaning, when you just put him first, the rest will fall into place, and you won't look back having any regrets. But I feel like when it's the other way around, you'll have nothing but regrets. So yeah.
Yeah, you're 40 years younger than me, and you just said a bunch of stuff that's convicted me. So I want to share something with you that I haven't really talked about publicly much, but so when I was first saved, I didn't. I just you want to serve, you want to get involved, you feel like, hey, all these years I've been ignoring God, and now I got a chance maybe to serve Him in some way. So,
Mhm.
but I didn't know anything. I didn't, I just bought a Bible last year, and I'm reading through the Bible and just doing my best to kind of catch up. And so, 7 years later, I had a seminary degree, but it took me 7 years to get it because I was just chipping at it, and so a degree in theology, and then, I was serving in the local church, and I was just writing what I was discovering, whatever that was geeked out on, I would write and I would put it, and teach my students in youth ministry, and then I would post it online on this website, and really never checked the stats ever. The
Wow.
entire time I had the Please Convince Me website, it was just a place. I felt like, hey, I don't know if anyone's reading this, but I'm going to prepare this material for my 50 students. And then afterwards, I'll just throw it online. And then, if anyone reads it, great, to help somebody else. Because otherwise, I'll probably not loop back to it for 4 or 5 years. Because, right, you have a cycle of teaching you do with your students. Well, then I got the opportunity to write a book, and it fell at me just at my feet because Sean McDowell, who, Josh McDowell's son, and he's a great apologist. You probably heard him speak, and
I
he
think I
he
had Sean on the channel at one point when I first
oh,
started.
good. Oh,
Yeah.
good. So we were doing youth ministry, and he said, you should write a book about the stuff you're teaching these students. And so that's what Cold Case ended up being. Cold Case Christianity is just that book. And the year before it published, so that was about 2012. Um, my publisher or somebody said, hey, you need to read a book because you're getting ready to publish a book. And if you want this to be successful, there's a book out there called Platform by Michael Hyatt.
Hmm.
Now, I have used this book and referred it to others hundreds of times. I've taught classes at Biola where I've suggested people should buy this book. And what this book does, and the subtitle is Getting Heard in a Noisy World. Because the idea is you might have this idea of what your book is, but if no one writes a book they want no one to read, no one creates a video here that you want no one to watch. You've created this video with us tonight, right? The two of us together. And
Mhm.
at some point you think, well, if 10 people watch it, that's good, but I'd rather have 20 watch it. Well, that
Yeah.
desire to have 20 people reach more than 10 is the drive that can become the narcotic. And what Platform does is teach you how to build your social media platform. Now I'm 10 years downstream of that. Okay, because that was 2012. And I'll tell you that I understand now that the liabilities
Yeah.
to living in that world where you're constantly trying to grow your reach.
Mhm.
And now, sadly, I'll tell you that in the Christian publishing world, that's the only thing that people really care about.
Mm.
Publishers want to know how many people do you have reading your stuff right now, because they're not going to be able to sell your book anymore in an Amazon world. You're going to sell your own book based on the strength of your platform. So now this is encouraging us to spend so much time building a platform. Because if you want to write another book, if you want your ideas to be heard, well, I'm at the point now where I'm like trying to assess whether I want to do that anymore because I see the
Mhm.
dangers in it. What I see is, and really it was after Robbie Zacharias fell,
Yeah.
when I see that like the celebrity aspect of what it is we're doing, I just you're way ahead of yourself in the way you've been able to rein that in and to see the danger in it. Because a lot of
Mhm.
what we're doing is, the only people who had a chance to be celebrity back when I was a kid were the people who were on the legacy kind of networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. There was no, you had to go through a record company to be a recording artist. There was no Spotify. There was no YouTube. There were no ways to kind of there were no podcasts. You had to have somebody who had money to get you broadcast out. I mean, it was a very different world. The number of people who could chase celebrity were a small, small percentage of the overall population.
Yeah.
Well, now if you think about it, everyone could do something to chase
Mhm.
celebrity. And that brings out the absolute worst in us.
Yeah.
And so I'm ready to say, okay, again, if you're in that bullseye of the news cycle where you're chasing all of the hot topic news issues, so tomorrow your video will get the most clicks, your podcast will get the most clicks. People in that news cycle bullseye are not happy people,
Yeah. It's like an
right?
animal you have to keep alive because you every time
Yes,
it's fed and well nourished, you notice it, but then the second it starts to starve and the ribs start to show and the views are down,
yes,
you start to you start to panic, It's such a good
yes.
point.
Well, I'll
Such a
tell you
good
this.
point.
I'll just say this to you. I was on a flight across country and I was sitting one row back across the aisle from a nationally known with millions of listeners podcaster. Okay. So I'm saying he's a guy, but I'm not going to tell you who he was. And I watched him sit in that seat for about 3 hours, scanning his social media
Wow.
and just watching his body language. That's what we do when we interview people. We bring in, if they think we did a crime, a lot of what we're doing is nonverbal. So
Mhm.
I'm always watching, body language to see like what's the posture, like do I see tension, do I see nervousness, do I see anxiety? Oh my gosh, this guy was textbook.
Wow.
He was miserable, and he must have looked at his Twitter feed 1,000 times in the 3 hours, because I know that tomorrow, a lot of what he's gonna be talking about will be it from the Twitter feed.
Mhm.
So I get that. I mean, that's part of, like, business, right? But when you see, like, in that Target, that if the 10 ring is the center of the news cycle, people who are out in the 5 ring, there's that expression, they're dumb and happy. Well, there's a relationship between being dumb and happy. It turns out if you are willfully ignorant of all the things that you can't really control, you probably, for the most part, already know how you're gonna vote on those issues. You already know
Yeah.
how you're gonna respond to those issues. All you're doing is constantly aggravating you. When it comes time to vote on those issues, you'll vote on them.
Mhm.
Between now and then, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna live your life? It's not like my stress does not have a consequence on my marriage, on my kids, on the people in my world. It does. I gotta weigh the question. Is this am I called to no, we at the same time, you and I know that we are called to engage the world for the
Yeah.
cause of Christ, and that's what
Yeah.
we're trying to do. So there's the tension for me.
It
It's
it it's Go ahead, I'm sorry.
how do we continue to do this
I
at
was
the
just
same
thinking
time and
about
not
that.
go nuts?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this yesterday because I was thinking to myself, okay, I really want to. I'm definitely going to check out the book. I put it in the comments, but I was just thinking about that to myself because I'm like, okay, I want to get better at like promoting the content I'm putting out because obviously you're not going to catch any fish if you don't throw out any bait. But at the same time,
Mhm.
expressing what I just did about social media, I'm thinking, okay, well, how do I do that without, or how
Yeah.
do I do that while avoiding the pitfalls of it that just can take
Well
you over?
well, you're gonna find a way, but
Yeah.
that is because you know what? But here's the great thing about it is you already recognize that there is a trap in there. There's a
Hmm.
danger in there. So you just know that we're gonna have to find a way to do this and rein back in somehow that trap. A lot of it is trying to keep it in its place,
Hmm.
right? So, one of the ways I can kinda manage it is I'm not, all that, conscientious about some of the comments that people are going to make because you only have so many hours in a day, and if you're going to start to engage everyone's comments at some point, I'm not a ministry, I'm not a 501c3, I'm like you, just as somebody who's working full-time in something else and trying to squeeze this in on the side because you feel like this is important. And
Hmm.
I still feel that way now. The number of hours that I'm able to give to this is not as if I had a full-time job doing this and a full-time ministry. I probably feel compelled to do 10 times more every week. I'm just trying to, this is the expression of my faith, like it is for you. So here's the trick. The trick is to be able to do this and not pay attention, just do quality.
Hmm.
If you just do the same quality you've been doing so far, this is going to grow organically, not on the basis of your effort to market it, but just on the effort that you make to try to retain high quality. And people will find that, and people will want that. And then, of course, you got to figure out all the different ways you put this out. Like, I kind of feel like it's all hands on deck. So we're writing blogs and doing podcasts and doing videos, and you can only do so much. Do the best you can. Try to hit all those areas you can. And again, it's not because in the end, I haven't monetized that. I mean, I haven't monetized our blog or I don't put any advertising. I won't allow any advertising on the website.
Hmm.
I don't have a Patreon account. I don't do anything that is to monetize it because I have a pension. And the whole goal here is like, how do we model this for other believers that we would say, hey, you could do more and to communicate Christ to the world around you,
Yeah.
and just do it the cheapest way you possibly can. And a lot of these platforms are relatively free. We have equipment. Like those headphones cost you something. That
Yeah.
camera you're using is pretty good, so it's cost you something. This mic you're using is also, that's a Yeti, right? So
Yeah.
this is going to cost something, but they're affordable. And that's what I would say to anyone who's listening to us tonight or watching us tonight. We have to. I mean, if you're watching or listening, you're consuming content. That's what we do. I consume a lot of content, but at some point, as Christians, we're called to create content. We're called to not
Yeah.
just hear the sermons, but to communicate what's spoken in the sermons to others. So we want to consume the sermon and then create the sermon. So we are called to do these things, and I think we have to kind of figure out how to do this without at the same time losing our perspective, getting caught up in celebrity, and losing our character.
Yeah, and I want to just point out a couple quick things that have to directly do with that, which I have had going on even in just the last few weeks. It's amazing, really, because I think definitely these last few weeks I've gotten more of a handle on putting out content and taking the time to research. And I mean, editing is, I mean, oh my goodness, editing is
Oh, I
definitely
know.
the hardest part. But
Yes.
all of that stuff, and while trying to do all these other things, and you're ambitious when you're young. You have these freedoms and you want to take advantage of it. But I don't even remember what was going on when it happened. But I just remember having an epiphany, thinking to myself, like, man, I feel like I'm barely getting by doing like one video a week, or doing this or doing that. And I just had this thought in my mind where I'm like, man, I'm trying to, I'm upset that I'm not reaping the benefits of a creator while I'm living like a consumer, right? So I can't.
Mm.
Okay, yeah, I may have had a long day at work, but I can't expect to then, just browse on YouTube for an hour or two and then be upset that I don't have a script done for a video, the next day, and just expect it to just
Yeah.
pop out of thin air. And I'm like, I don't even know where the thought came from, but it was just so true. And I'm like, man, okay, I can't expect to reap those sorts of benefits if I'm not putting in the work. And it really forced me to change the way I think about things, right? So for me, I had to change my attitude and my mindset to where, hey, when I get home from work, that's not the end of my day, that's the beginning, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
beginning where it's time for me
Yeah.
to start focusing on what I really, want to do. And that's
Right.
this. And so, man, that has been hard to break, but I've been seeing the changes
Hmm.
and it's gotten more and more easy. And then regarding the second thing, about not getting caught up in like the celebrityism and the viewership
Yeah.
and all those things, that's such a good point too, because I mean that temptation is it's there. And I remember
Absolutely.
talking with a very, very close brother who told me, and I never forgot, this was only a few weeks ago, but I don't think I'm ever going to forget it. And he said, not all views are created equal. You can get caught up in how much you're pulling in, in 1 week or 1 month or whatever, and then compare yourself to, these celebrities who put out these music videos that get like
Yeah. Right.
500, a
That's
billion
right.
views. But when you look at the content they're putting out, 500 million views, and not even one person who walks away thinking like, man, that really glorified God. And when he said
Yeah.
that, I was like, man, that's so true. That's so true, because we think we want that, but then it's like, well, would I really want that if it meant abandoning this and abandoning, the truth of the gospel and what it means to stand for that? No, I mean, it wouldn't be
That's
worth it.
right.
And so he said that to me and it really impacted me. And then not even half an hour later, I was talking to a friend who doesn't have a YouTube channel or anything, but was just saying how he struggled with that in a general sense, right? Just caring about what other people thought and how they perceive him. And I told him the exact same thing. And he was like, man, that really blessed me. And so, we may think that it's only us going through these sorts of battles, and that that struggle may be something that only we have to bear, but many people are thinking about it in one degree or another. And I think even us having this conversation now is gonna do a lot of good in disseminating that to them and showing them that, hey, it's a real thing. We're all in it. We're all here on the front lines. But the beauty of it is that we get to choose what type of Christians we want to be. We get to choose how we're going to respond and how we're gonna rise above it. And I think we'll look back and be glad.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and you said something very, very interesting when you said earlier about how the TikTok algorithm or YouTube Shorts algorithm will kind of it'll keep throwing things to you that you think it'll keep you on the platform. So then
Hmm.
before long, an hour goes by, and that's very, very true. And so I think that part of it for me is I had to make a decision about like what, because you're right, you don't pour it out of an empty well or out of an empty glass. It has to be, you got to fill it up with something first. So you're going to have to write a script. You're going to have to study something and know something that you think you're compelled to say. You're going to do some research. So then the question becomes, well, this is why I could spend a lot of time just researching what the world is throwing out there. But at some point, I just realized, hey, you know what? If I'm going to spend an extra hour today doing something, it's probably going to need to be reading scripture. And then I'm going to make some observation about scripture that resonates with the world. But I'm going to have to default to having more expertise about that text than I do about what's happening in the world, because I can't do both. I can't do it all. Okay. I've got
Nope.
finite number of hours to study. And so I'm really looking at the things that are foundational. Is the Bible true? And should we take it seriously? If we took the Bible seriously and we agreed that it was true, we would end up in the same position on much of the cultural issues that are
Man.
downstream. But
Yeah.
either we don't think the Bible is true, and so we just reject a Christian worldview, or we think it's true, but we treat it poorly. We kind of take things out of order. We take things out of context. We shape a view that matches the world, trying to put one verse next to the other instead of taking the Bible seriously, understanding what hermeneutics is all about and how to read through scripture. So we read it in its context. So again, for me, is the Bible true and should we take it seriously? And that's all upstream, from the things that are downstream, which are, whatever you name the hot topic. But here's
Yeah.
what's interesting about it too. Look at the difference between us right now. I mean, we are different, both ethnically. We're different racially. We're different age from an age perspective. Yet we don't see each other that way. It's not that we're blind to the differences. We're not blind to the differences. We understand how the differences ought to be viewed from a Christian worldview.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
We understand that you can be different. This is one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is that the Christian worldview argues that we should retain the different. We can be different, yet be equally valuable in the eyes of God. That we don't have to be all the same, and we can hold on to our differences. Like I got two cars in the driveway. If one of them's a truck and one of them's a sedan, you're going to use those two. They can have the exact same blue book value. They could be the exact same value, but be very different. And so I think but this view that we can retain our differences and those can be elevated, yet we can be of equal value and be seen to each other with having equal value. I wonder if we're losing that, right? Because it seems like the only way I can get this view is if, do I need to change my gender assignment? Do I need to
Yeah.
think of myself with that identity in order to have that value? Like, what is it? That even in marriages, I'll just tell you now, I'm a compatibilist. I believe we are different yet
Mhm.
equally valuable. We bring different things but I wonder if the culture is trying to erase all those differences. But what I loved is when we first started talking about doing this interview, I just saw the most important difference between you and me is age. That's what I
Mm.
saw. Now maybe it's just an old guy thinking that way.
Hmm.
Like I think of all the other differences that we might have between the two of us, and I thought what I'm most curious about is how does a Gen Z like, are you seeing what I'm seeing in the culture from an age perspective? Because I think the future of the Christian movement is not people my age.
Hmm.
It's you guys. And the future of Christianity in America is you guys, the cultural shapers and leaders. Are
Yeah.
you? Yeah, I always say this all the time. Think about when's the last time a guy in his 60s wrote a song that changed the way people that made the top 10 build. No, it's people your age who are writing
Yeah.
those songs. So it turns out that the young people have the ability to shape culture and twist culture and turn culture and lead culture. And so I just am encouraged. I want to encourage you. Yeah, you have to you got to be smart in terms of how you try to broaden your reach. But if you're just faithful, and your reach will grow.
Absolutely.
because God will bless your faithfulness. And I think sometimes it's a rush to popularity that is the problem.
Yeah.
No, I'm not as concerned anymore. I mean, if you look at the growth of our YouTube channel, on our channel, it has been very steady, but not fast.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will die before it reaches the level that my peers have already gotten in the last 2 years, because
Yeah.
they're just doing different content than I am. But I'm just staying on the main things. The main things. Is the Bible true? Should we take it seriously? So I
Amen.
just want to encourage you to. By the way, I got to ask you before we sign off here, because we're getting close to the end.
Hmm.
Okay, tell me what the third. You've got the third apology is the name of your, and I will
Yeah.
be also putting this video. I will turn it into an audio, and I'll probably post it in 2 weeks on my podcast. This conversation, but what is,
Awesome.
and so people can find you at the third apology on YouTube right now. But I'm going to encourage you to get a URL
Yeah. I got
to
it.
get a website, so that you can, have a home base from which you can have all these. I consider all these social media platforms are like your rental properties, but you have to have a
Yeah.
property you own. So tell me why did you call yourself the third apology?
I remember, I don't even, it sounds so dumb looking back on it now, but I remember thinking to myself, okay, I need a channel name, but like there are so many names nowadays that have, such and such apologetics, such and such, apologetics. Something I need something different. And I was looking, I said, okay, well, who are some of like the best known apologists throughout history? And one of the first ones I found was Justin Martyr
Yep,
uh,
absolutely.
and so he basically wrote the first and second apology where he contended for the faith during his time
Okay.
and writing against the powers and things like that. So I thought, hey, he never wrote a third one, but even though he lived thousands of years ago, the mission's still the same, right? So this is the third apology. We're continuing where he left off, and we're contending for the faith. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's brilliant. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, that's really good to know.
yeah,
So yeah, this is the kind of thinking that I think is going to change things, and it's seeing the long game. That you're right. The mission hasn't changed, and if we are lucky enough to still be around as a species, if God doesn't come back, if Jesus doesn't come back before this is all said and done, this mission is not going to change going forward 100 years either.
yep,
It's just not. It's going to be more difficult, though. I think. I think we are going to end up in a culture that is like but we grow in those hostile cultures. It's in the Middle East and in China where the church might be underground, but they're hardcore folks who
man,
love Jesus, and maybe
man,
in some ways have been sharpened iron in a special way in those environments that we don't even have it happen here in America. I don't know, but I think we're going to be in a place
yeah,
where they're going to see our worldview as hostile to what it is they want to do. I get that. And it's
absolutely,
our love for each other, as different as we all are in this Christian family, that is still the best testimony. This is what I think people are seeing in small places, small house churches, where people are dedicated to each other as a family, even though they're not related by blood.
yeah.
That's a strong testimony to the non-believing world. So I'm just glad to be on your show, and I will definitely post a link to it on ours also in our when I put it out as a podcast in 2 weeks.
That means a whole lot, Jay. And there's so much more I could say and even want to say right now. But yeah, I think
Well,
that's a
we're not
great place.
done. We're going to do this again. So
Yeah,
so,
okay.
but at least
Yeah,
this is a good first chance, a good first start.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great place to end it. And we started this basically saying, okay, is what you're seeing as someone who's older similar to what I'm seeing as someone who's younger? And I think yes, it is. And the number one thing that we're seeing above all else, the pinnacle, is that you're right. The Bible and whether or not it's true is the foundation. Because when I think about how many things would change overnight if that were the case, man, I mean, it really is something. And so I hope this is encouraging to everyone who watched that. That is the mission, right? To talk about the Bible, to talk about Christianity in light of other worldviews, in light of science, in light of these political issues and the cultural issues that are so paramount in our day, right? They're not going anywhere. And so it's up to us to stand our ground and to contend for the faith. It doesn't matter if you have the channel or if you have the viewership or if you have the audience. It's all about whether or not you have the will and the heart
Yeah.
for it and the love for Christ more than anything to stand for it, because you may be persecuted for your faith and no one else may ever even know about it, right? But God sees, and that's what's ultimately going to matter when it's all said and done. And so, man, I'm so blessed to be able to have Jay on today, everyone. I know you all were blessed as well. I'm looking forward to hearing more from him. And as I said, man, I can't plug this book enough. If you have not picked up, I put the link in the description. Okay. So to his Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then the website where you can purchase the book. you've got to check it out, because I mean, this will be the first step to reaching those people who need that identity and need those answers. Like I said, he made it a point to not reference the New Testament. This is all organic. This is all from the secular world in a sense, and yet, I mean, you still can't avoid it, right? And that just shows how you said it during even your presentation as well. You know that no person of fiction has had such an impact like this, and so it's likely that we can deduce that Jesus wasn't a person of fiction, right? And so,
That's right.
absolutely, dive into that, everyone, and I look forward to hearing more from Jay. And I thank him so much for coming on. So,
Thanks
with
for
that,
having
we're
me
going to
on. I
end this
appreciate
stream.
it.
Yep, and God bless you all, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.